they may both love ska. There may be some crossover, but I would say more than not, there isn't a lot of crossover because it's so different. It's just like metal. If you have like classic metal or new metal or rap metal, it's very different genres, but they're still in this metal category. And I find that with ska too. But I'm going off topic in terms of DIY and ska. Um, so if you want me to start from the beginning, ska, let's say from the two tone movement of Madness, English Beat Specials, Bad Manners, as that was starting to die in the late 80s, it was a very healthy scene and very underground. A lot of paper zines, um, and a lot of bands that would do shows in rented halls. Like when I was in high school in the 80s, we would always go to shows in rented halls or dances that would just spin R&B and soul, skinhead reggae, and that's what we did in high school. We went to these events that were run by kids who put on shows, and so it's different in the fact that there was no social media, so it was all organic, word of mouth, and through flyering. But it was the same. It was just young kids who were invested in an underground music, especially because that second wave of ska from England was on its way out, and we had this subculture of, and it was very fashion oriented, just skinheads, mods, rude boys, rude girls, that Vespa culture. So you would go to these shows or these dances, and you'd have Lambrettas and Vespas lying down the street. Um, and if you were wearing the wrong clothes too, it was very frowned upon. If you showed up and your suit wasn't authentic from the 60s, people would make fun of you. It was very different to now where everyone could just go and have fun. And it was very violent too. With the skinhead culture, whether it's whether they were sharp skins or Nazi skins, anytime you have a group of skinheads in a room together, there's going to be violence. And that was the 80s was just violence at ska shows. And again, I'm getting off topic. The DIY. DIY. It was very DIY in the 80s and through the 90s until it popped off in, what was it, like 95 when the band started getting signed. And then everybody started a ska band that was a marching band horn player in high school.
Sweet. All right. So I want to pause for a second because it looks like my internet messed up as soon as the stream started. And
Okay.
it went live, like actually went live right around when you first started talking. So if everyone wants to introduce themselves again for all the people
Yeah.
watching.
Mike Park, Asian Man Records.
Mike Sosinski, Bad Time Records, and Kill Lincoln.
Jake Sulzer, Counterintuitive Records.
Our original intros were so much funnier than this too.
I know.
It's such a shame. We were having laughs.
I know, yeah. We were just talking about the internet thing, basically right before the stream, and then it happened as soon as it started. Anyway, yeah, so just to reiterate what we talked about right before that, it wasn't much, basically saying how, like, I wanted to start out talking about kind of like the DIY world and how ska kind of, how the perspective of ska from like Mike Park being someone who has run Asia Man Records out of your garage for like the past 30 or so years, and kind of just watching ska blow up and come down. So thank you, Mike Park.
Yeah. Sure. Did were they able to hear what I had said?
It looks like
About
it because the
okay.
chat was kind of like responding to like the skinhead thing and all the stuff like that. So yeah, the DIY aspect, to me, that's such an integral part of any music scene or any form of music. And I think a big misconception people give is that ska came out of nowhere and then it died out of nowhere type thing. Where in my, like, based off of just what I've seen, what I've read, because obviously I was born in 95, I did not see ska in its heyday, like, ever. But to my understanding, it's like ska had been going, like you said, in America. There were underground shows throughout the 80s and into the 90s. And when you see bands like No Doubt and Sublime, like, yeah, they blew up, but like, who was No Doubt going to shows to see to start No Doubt? They were seeing Fishbone in the 80s type thing. Like, the Boss Tones formed in the early 80s. and you had like the Toasters who formed in like the early 80s. So all these bands were doing the DIY grind and booking shows themselves because not many people were open to playing ska shows, like outside of ska, so to say. Would you say that's true, Mike?
Well, so when there was a lull in the late 80s, the only bands that were touring were Fishbone, the Untouchables, and the Toasters. They first came west in 88 is when I saw them. There was also Bim Scala Bim was touring. And nationally, I would say those are the four bands that were touring in the late 80s. And that was it. And Fishbone and the Untouchables on a bigger scale because Fishbone was on Columbia, Sony, and the Untouchables were on Restless Records, which
Right.
is a major indie, and had hits on MTV.
Right. So how did you get into like playing shows and playing in bands and touring and stuff like that?
So when we started, I was in a ska band in '86 called Skank Head, and we just did. I was junior in high school, and so from that we just kind of caught on with. It was a lot with that scooter crowd, so that the correlation of scooters, Vespas and Lambrettas and ska just kind of like coincided. So you would have these scooter clubs and they would put on these dances and they'd have bands play. And so we were able to play some of those shows, especially in Southern California, San Diego, and LA. There was the scooter culture was massive, and
Right.
especially with the Untouchables too. They were all mods, and so they all drove Vespas and Lambrettas.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would get shows through that. And then as Skank and Pickle came, there was a lot of letter writing. So I remember writing letters to like Gangster Fun in Detroit, Chuck Wren in Chicago, who does Jump Up, and I would just I'd say, hey, I'm in this band, we're trying to tour, and you'd wait a couple weeks if you got a letter back, or you leave your phone number and hope they could call because long distance was very expensive in the 80s. And so we just kind of did a lot of letter writing, and I booked tours that way, just writing letters and postcards. And you would just do exchanges. I remember like Gangster Fun in Detroit. They just gave us all the money. They said, "Hey, we know you're on tour." So that giving aspect of DIY was very apparent with a lot of bands. Not with every band, but I remember with Gangster Fun because they were so big in Detroit. For them to give us the entire door was amazing, and it helped us quite a bit. And I'll never forget that.
That's it blows my mind that like that was the way that you had to tour, like writing letters and stuff like that. I feel like with the internet, like touring obviously has become easier for bands, but sometimes I see bands like you can just go on the internet and DM a band saying, "Hey, I'm trying to set up a show," but I just don't see a lot of that happening with ska music. Like I feel like when you're booking tours as a ska band, it gets pretty hard now, just because that like network isn't here. Mike, do you want to talk anything about Mike Sosinski? Do you want to talk anything about that, or like why you started Bad Time and how it was like for Kill Lincoln being a newer band and
Sure.
your experience like doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I see so many. First of all, I have so many questions for you, Mike Park. So I'm trying to contain myself. But uh, it's funny. I see a lot of. I mean, there's obviously a lot of parallels between being in a DIY ska band back then and more recently. You know, there are pockets of ska scenes around the country and internationally. And you know, when you're touring, you try to tap into that. You say, okay, we want to go to these 3 cities. Who's playing ska in Pittsburgh? Who's a ska band in Detroit? Let's look them up. And you know, more recently they may not be as big bands. You know, it's probably a very small scene. Maybe it's just a band and a couple friends, honestly, but a show's a show. But it's probably just a lot quicker now to communicate. I mean, we're not writing letters. It's you know, Facebook messaging and trying to track them down however you can, and emails, and there's the occasional phone call. It's funny that it's just occasional now, but yeah, but there is I mean, when Kill Lincoln started touring, it was just putting together a tour that way. It's just finding out who was doing ska. And when we started playing in DC, we were not accepted by any particular scene that was in the city. So it was even a challenge to just book shows locally, because you'd be trying to just book with being one of the only. Of course, there's the Pie Tasters in DC. There's some other great ska punk bands coming out now, but for us as a local unknown band 10 years ago, the DIY punk scene didn't want to have anything to do with us because we were a ska band. Also, because 10 and 12 years ago, we probably just weren't a very good band. But also, it just wasn't as accepting. So what do? You build your own kind of thing. It's how any DIY scene starts. It's feeling rejected by one thing, so you say, well, screw it, I'm just going to do it myself. And that's sort of where Bad Time came from. I had written letters and sent demo packages to labels, and actually, Mike, you sent me one of the nicest rejection emails I got from anybody, and I really appreciated it, that to get a response. And I think I reached a point with Kill Lincoln and with other bands that I'd been seeing and playing with where I was just tired of asking for help, tired of hoping somebody would bring us out, tired of hoping somebody would put us on their label. And I said, you know what? There's so many good bands that somebody needs to do it. Nobody's doing just ska punk. Of course, there's Jump Up doing great ska, and Asian Man still doing ska releases. There were a couple. I got to shout out Community Records and Asbestos Records for doing some great ska and ska punk releases. But 2 years ago when I started Bad Time, no one was doing just ska punk, and I'd met too many good bands on the road and through my years at Kill Lincoln, that really I thought deserved a platform and just deserved a place to unify. So that's really why I put together Bad Time, in short, as short as I can.
Yeah, and then, I say it all the time, but I think it's super important. First off, I say it all the time, I don't trust record labels, and it's actually funny, I would tell people all the time, there's 3 labels that I trust: Bad Time, Counterintuitive, and Asian Man. So thank y'all for being here, running the... Oh, no, there's other labels that I trust, but y'all are definitely the 3 that I think are, like, what a label should be for their bands. Like, to me, if you don't know the face of a label, that's already sketchy to me. That to me, you should know who's running the thing, who's putting out the bands, who's doing the music. So to have a ska label that's representative of the new ska bands right now is extremely important. And I feel like when the bands work together and play off of each other more of like we're one big family rather than just like doing their own individual thing, that's when you start to see ripples being made. I recently, like 2 weeks ago maybe, watched the Pick It Up Ska in the 90s documentary, and that was a big thing that I noticed. I remember watching that, and people, especially like in the Orange County scene, they were saying things like, we would go to like Office Depot or whatever and just like make tour flyers and copy them, and no one, like you said, Mike, like no one would have us on our shows, so we had to do our own shows. And that reminds me a lot of what I was doing in high school. Like, I remember going to Office Depot, printing 100 flyers for a show, folding them up, putting them in an envelope, writing "You're invited," because the show was Ska Prom. So I made like a whole like prom themed, like, they were nice envelopes. Honestly, I wasted money doing that. But like 20 people showed up with the flyer. So I think it's like that putting in that work ethic to then get the work ethic in return, or get the product in return, and that's like a super important thing that things like Bad Time Records is doing right now.
It's not DIY if you're not losing some money, Jeremy. So
you are absolutely right.
That's the key.
Cool. Another talking point that I kind of want to bring up is along the lines of working together, which this is, I kind of want to start this one out with a question. And I want to see if anyone in the chat can get it. This question is, and I'm not like calling this band out, but they're not the only band to do this, but when's the last time Less Than Jake took another ska band on tour as an opening band? And as the chat tries to figure that out, I wanted to ask Jake. Jake, I've talked to you about this a lot, and just the touring and bands and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about Counterintuitive and how that got started, and kind of how that family and unit of bands has been built up?
Yeah, definitely. So it got started just from, I feel like a similar way to Bad Time, of seeing bands out there that I felt like had the potential that nobody was giving platforms to, and just seeing if I could get involved one way or another. And then I feel like what really made it take off was growing that family aspect of it, which I feel like I sort of just lucked into by going to like South by Southwest, maybe 2017. A lot of the DIY bands that were playing that ended up being, if you look back now, probably over 50% of my roster. And so that was kind of eye-opening to me to just be somewhere where 20 bands are playing the same shows day after day, because there's only so many DIY bands playing the unofficial showcases, and they're all just there. Nobody's getting paid. Everybody's taking time off work or school, but they just want to play their music, meet new people, and just have fun and like just play rock together. And so it was cool to like be a part of that and see firsthand bands like Prince Daddy and Oso Oso and Mom Jeans and Retirement Party all just like dedicating their lives to something that at the time was not returning any sort of profit or value, but it was just like they just had the feeling inside like, I know this is what I need to be doing because I want to make music. And so that was like super inspiring for me to see. And obviously got a nice chance to network and like meet a lot of these artists that I end up working with just from being on the road and getting to meet them in person, because I definitely am envious listening to Mike Park talk about the way that shows were back in the day, where it's completely underground and everybody's just making flyers and you find out about it that way. Whereas when I started booking shows, it was like the only thing I thought to do was make a Facebook event, because that's the way that I'd been going to shows for a few years at that point, was just, oh, I see the Facebook event. I listen to some of the band camps and I'm like, oh, these artists sound cool. So that was sort of like my experience. And so I'm definitely envious of missing out on a pre-internet DIY experience.
You're not missing much, man.
Well, that's good to know.
I definitely think, especially because I'm 25. I was born in 1995. So when I started getting into music and getting to shows, like I got a MySpace in 2006, and then I started going to shows in 2010. So like social media definitely predates. My experiences with social media comes before with DIY and stuff like that. And I could definitely say that being someone who is so young, active, and DIY, like the DIY emo world that like the counterintuitive label is in, and then the ska world. First off, everyone in the emo world is my age or younger. Everyone in the ska world is like maybe my age or definitely a lot older. And so I just kind of see the differences between that and how they approach using the internet in general. Like right now, Twitter is where the entire emo scene is at. And you like even on TikTok, I'm starting to see a lot of bands making their way onto like the newer social media platforms. But then you start when I look at the ska bands, typically I can't even name outside of the Bat Time roster any ska bands that are active on Twitter. There's not really any that are on like TikTok. Even Instagram, sometimes I look and they barely even use that. But Facebook is like where I see all of the news being pushed. And I think that's like a big representation of kind of where like ska sits as far as just culturally in general. Like ska tends to be, I say a lot of the times, stuck in the 90s or very much stuck in the past in a lot of ways. And I feel like that's a thing that kind of hurts the genre in many ways more than it helps it as far as bands coming up. Things change and things progress. And a lot of the thing I appreciate about a lot of the Bad Time bands is that y'all are adding something fresh and new as far as the genre goes, like stylistically, in my opinion. And
I want to go back to something you said, Jeremy, if that's cool.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Because it's funny, because I started playing, so I started playing ska when I was 13, so it's 20 years ago. So I was in a band right before social media, and then MySpace happened. And like during the MySpace era, something happened with like local ska bands, and it's been pervasive, I think, for the past like couple of years and throughout my time in ska bands, there's like a sense of odd like competition between local bands. A lot of times, there's not really a sense of unity. We all talk, which we all talk about. It's really like, and I think it comes down to, I think social media had a big part in that. It was like, who's got the most MySpace followers, who's got, who's top 8 or whatever. But also it came down to, I think, with limited opportunities, in the 2000s, if Mustard Plug's only coming through town, once or twice a year, and every ska band in New Jersey, I grew up in New Jersey, there's 15, 20 young ska bands, they all want to be on that bill. They're going to start competing with each other, and they're not really going to be supporting each other. And I feel like that attitude has kind of stuck. It's been like, it feels like bands are more often than not competing for listeners, for friends, for followers, for fans. So what I'm hoping to do with Bad Time is to create like a sense of unity. But of course, like there's going to be bands that get left off and don't feel good about it, and it's just going to, it's create this cycle. But I do feel like there is that odd sense of competition. I don't know if I'm sure it's like that in various different scenes, right? But in ska punk in particular, all my time in playing in bands, it's felt very contentious. And I've been when they when they have a battle of the bands and they have 15 bands on the show, and they said, all right, whoever sells the most tickets gets to open for Catch 22 at Birch Hill. It's like, all right, you're gonna hate those guys who sell more tickets than you. So there was a weird time when it was just creating this tension. I think as there were limited opportunities. Just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah.
That's the promoter's fault, if anything.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Yeah, and that there is definitely a lot of promoters who are very terrible at doing their jobs, and a lot of promoters that somehow get the gig of booking shows for really big bands. A lot of the times, the local support is out of the control of the touring act. Like, I've been on 2 tours with Rubik Fish, and we would show up to venues, and there's a local opener, and we didn't even know about it until we got there, type thing, because the promoter just threw it on. And sometimes our set would have to get cut short, or even Rubik Fish's set would have to get cut a little bit, just so, we can get out of there by curfew. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of blame, I feel like, during that time specifically, of promoters who sucked at their job and utilizing the internet and social media as a way to like prey on the naive young people who play in bands and local bands and finding a way to make the money instead of them just doing their job. Mike Park, do you feel like there was ever that like feeling of competition in ska back when you were like doing in the 90s, like Asian Man and stuff like that in your first bands?
Sure, but I would say that with any genre, there's going to be competition. And so you just weed out the people who are not about community, you just weed them out. And that's why I became friends with certain bands. That's why I was attracted to the MU330s, the Tantra Monsters from Hawaii, the Lesson Jakes, and the Slapsticks. They were just good people. But there's to say it's just the ska scene would be untrue. That'll be any genre: rock, funk, rap, hip hop, EDM. You have assholes in everything. In any wake of life, there's going to be assholes, and so that's just the way the world works. You just got to find your community and you build from that.
Yes, and it's funny that you kind of say that it's funny how like all of y'all kind of said that there's like this happens a lot, and I'm sure Jake, you can attest to that. You see that type of competition vibe, like treating music as a competition. You see that a lot in like the DIY emo indie world, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so like, I mean, I'm also very heavily involved in that world as well, and I see it there too. And I think that's a thing that kind of really boils down to the question of why does ska kind of get this rep of being like that, of like bands being competitive with each other, but you don't see that rep necessarily with other music genres. And then the question kind of boils down to is, well, why does ska kind of get a lot of reps in a lot of ways, and you don't really see those reps from other music genres as well. Like people will say like, "Oh, ska is goofy. Like, why would I want to listen to that?" And it's like, but then you can have a band with a name like Prince Daddy and the Hyena. I love them, but that name is ridiculous. But no one gives them like flag for being like a goofy band when their name is Prince Daddy and the Hyena. Like, you kind of see what I'm saying with that? So
Yeah,
I
I'll
think,
take this. I'll take this.
oh yes, please.
Just ska. People who talk trash about ska, they don't know anything about ska. Their only knowledge of ska is Real Big Fish, Say Ferris, and No Doubt. They have no idea who Jackie Matu is, or Toots Hibberts, Don Drummond. You know, if you say Bob Marley, maybe they'll know Bob Marley, but they don't know anything about ska. They don't know anything about the politics of the two-tone movement, about the racial equality of that movement of two-tone in as a whole. Just the name two-tone of black and white unity, it's not pushed because people don't know about it. They only know Hawaiian shirts and wackiness. And that's no diss on Real Big Fish. I love Real Big Fish, and I think that band gets shit on more than any band, and they don't deserve it because when everyone turned their back on ska, Real Big Fish was the only band that kept touring. And if they didn't, and Less Than Jake, and if those bands didn't tour for that good 6-year gap, ska would have been dead in the US. And they kept it going. So anyone who shits on those bands, you have no right. They've been, especially like Aaron Barrett loves ska. He's a lifer. I mean, to look like that at 50 years old and have those sideburns. Well, how old is he? 45. Damn, give him props. Give him props. But yeah, so the people who talk trash about ska, they just don't know. They don't know what ska is. And I've just seen it. I've like people will say like Just Friends is ska. I was like, what are you talking about? How is the ska or Rocket from the Crypt? I remember during the ska boom in the 90s, Rocket from the Crypt getting thrown into the ska realm. It's like, this is the farthest thing from ska. It's just because they have horns, you think it's ska. There's horns doesn't equate ska. There's nothing about horns that is ska. Ska is strictly a rhythm that's on the and so it doesn't make any sense. So anyone who talks trash about ska or makes fun of it, I think it's funny still because I love pick it up jokes, but they just don't know anything about ska. And so it's just I just take it with a grain of salt and I go, well, this person knows nothing about ska. And so again, I think I'm going off topic again. It's they only equate it with what they remember from the wacky 90s ska boom. But I find nothing to discredit those bands, and I feel like those bands, especially the ones that are still going, more power to them. Like Big D and the Kids Table, as a band, they kind of went right after that ska boom, and they've kept going throughout. And when ska was dead, those guys were still going and pushing. Like they worked so hard, and they worked so hard during a tough time, and they just kept building their own audience.
I have a quick question, Mike, just to piggyback off of that, because this is something I've thought about a lot, and also this idea was kind of planted in my mind from the Punk Rock MBA. He's a YouTuber that kind of does things like, why did My Chemical Romance blow up? Why did Green Day pop off? Like, why did Strung Out not pop off? Like, did they come to her or whatever? He does videos like that, and he talks a lot about 2008 and the recession. Do you think that played any part as far as ska kind of getting a hit of dying, quote unquote, it getting harder?
No, I think ska was dying in 1999 is when it started to die, and so 2008 it was dead already.
I think I just want to piggyback on what you said, Mike, and I think people who are my age and like ska, we don't just like ska, we love ska and we respect those bands and we appreciate those bands, and you're right. I mean, if those bands weren't working, if you guys weren't doing it, then we wouldn't be listening to ska. We wouldn't be playing in ska bands. I think it was an interesting time when I first started playing ska and getting into ska. I mean, I learned about ska from being into skateboarding and hearing the Boss Tones on an X Games compilation, and then playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater in 1999 or 2000 and finding out about the Suicide Machines, right? And I'm like, what is this? But when you started playing shows and started getting into ska and learning, going through the Asian Man catalog and checking out Moon Ska and Jump Up and really learning about the roots, like, and finding out that the scene, the music scene around you, like, doesn't want ska anymore. This thing you're just getting into, like, people aren't as interested in it. And to keep going with it, like, so many of my peers, like bands that I've met, like, the only reason we played ska at that point was because we loved it. Like, there was something about the music and the ideas behind it that really appealed to us. Like, I'd go to a show with my sister and we'd see Taking Back Sunday, right? And I'd be like, okay, like, this is cool. It's not my thing. I'd go with my cousin and we'd see Big D and Mustard Plug, and just the energy in the room and being accepted for who you were and, like, not having to worry about being cool and all that. It was just like an unbelievable experience. So I'd say the people who do know ska now, a lot of them really do know ska. People who get it, like, they know their history and they try to learn, they try to seek out those bands. There are a lot of people on the fringes and people who just caught the wave in the 90s, but people playing in bands now really do love and respect where ska has come from, and respect what the bands before them did. And that's the only reason we're playing ska, because we love it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. I can definitely attest for that, especially being someone who got into ska in 2010. 2010 was right around that moment where, like Mike said, the only bands touring were Real Big Fish and Less Than Jake. I can name, like, it's kind of wild to think about. Before joining We're the Union, there's so many bands I had never seen before. Like, I had never seen Mustard Plug, Big D and the Kids Table, Goldfinger, so many bands. Suicide Machines, I first saw them like less than 2 years ago. So many bands that you would expect I've seen so many times, but it's like, no, I've seen Real Big Fish and Less Than Jake like 17 times. But when it comes to, like, any of the other ska bands, it's just kind of a nowhere to be found in that good old time of 2010 to 2013 when I was in high school. So yeah, those bands definitely did kind of keep the torch going into the future, that is today. But a big thing I kind of did want to get back to, that I kind of, like, started out with and then derailed like 27 times, is kind of like that touring aspect. And because we're talking about touring, and a thing that I see, like, in the emo scene, Jake, I remember I first brought this up with you, and then we went on like 27 tangents. But it's that, like, I remember 4 years ago seeing, like, I think it was Mom Jeans, Just Friends, Retirement Party was shortly on that tour. You know which tour I'm talking about? I think it went into Fest.
Yeah, it was Awake But Still in Bed.
Awake But Still in Bed, yeah. And that tour went into Fest. And kind of just seeing that group of bands together. And then later that year, I would see, like, Just Friends touring with Pool Kids and Save Face. And then a little later, I'll see Pool Kids, Retirement Party, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then, like, a thing I've kind of noticed in that, like, circle is a lot of those bands in that counterintuitive immediate circle, y'all tend to tour together a lot and play shows together a lot. Is that, like, an intentional thing that y'all do?
I think it definitely is. A lot of the bands I work with are very, like, adamant about picking who they're on tour with, rather than just saying, oh, now we have a booking agent. They can decide whoever's going to sell the most tickets and be the most beneficial for us to tour with. It's always been like, no, we want to tour with bands that we like, who are either our friends or we want to become friends with. And yeah, it's always been that sort of, like, doing the research, seeking out the artists that they want to be on tour with or want to give an opportunity to open one of their tours to, rather than just, like, handing the reins off and being more hands off, similar to how you described on Real Big Fish tours, where it seemed like they, like, might not have even known about local openers. Whereas the bands that I work with tend to be the type that would be, like, from the get-go, like, we want full control over the local openers because we've got a list of 20 bands that we want to make sure have the opportunity to open for us in different cities.
Yeah, that's like a really cool thing I've always admired, especially about that world of music, is the care that goes into having of who's opening the shows, who's touring together. Sometimes I will look at some ska bills or lineups, and I'm kind of just like, why is the band opening this show like this band? Like, it just seems kind of random. Like, they're not a ska band. Sometimes they're not even a punk band. It's just kind of like they're there. Sometimes they'll get on a tour multiple times. And I feel like that's less of a decision of like, I believe in this band as a ska band to help build up this community that we have, and more of just of an agent kind of just threw them on. That's the vibe I've gotten a lot from ska tours. And that's kind of like why I asked that question of like, when's the last time you saw Less Than Jake take a ska band on tour? I sat down and actually went through every flyer that I could find from 2007 forward, and I couldn't find a single flyer from an American tour, because they've done a lot of Europe tour. Europe gets all the good ska tours. But as far as like an American tour, the last time Less Than Jake took opening ska band on tour that wasn't a co-headliner was 2007, and that was Against All Authority, being that band, who's also an older band. So it's kind of like, being someone who's in a newer band, especially a newer band that has worked very hard for such a long time, you kind of feel like even the bands that are still touring, they kind of don't care that you're there, or don't want to bring you out, or don't want to even talk about you. This is kind of another, and again, I hate to make it feel like I'm like ranking on Less Than Jake, but this is kind of just a thing that I remember seeing once. They played SuperCon in South Florida, which is like an anime convention that had bands playing for some reason. And when they played this convention, they did a Q&A. And my friend went up to ask a question. He's like, hey, I'm in a new ska band. What can we do to get started? And their response was, you should just quit. There's too many ska bands. There's too many ska bands. You should just kind of quit. Like, we don't really need more ska bands. It's not worth it. And that, to me, that was kind of just like a moment where I was like, why is a band, like, this person looks up to you in your band, why is that the response you're giving? Like, if someone loves ska music and is making it, they should just make it because they love it, and not because there's too much of it or not enough of it or any other reason. And that's kind of just like, when I see that kind of response of like other interviews of like, hey, like, what are some new ska bands to check out? And like, no one ever lists any of the new bands type thing. That's kind of just the feeling as like a new artist that we can get sometimes. I don't know if, Mike, you have any thoughts on that as well, being in a newer ska band.
I mean, I guess I'll go out and say, like, yeah, it's there's just definitely a lot of like frustrating times, but like, I'll be the first to admit that, like, you know, when my band started out, we weren't a very good band, and there are lots of ska. I think ska. I mean, Mike Park, like, you could probably talk about this much better, but like, after the big popular boom, I'm sure everyone wanted to play ska. Like you said, everyone who was in marching band wanted to be in a ska band. It seemed like and I think bands like Real Big Fish made it look easy. It's not easy, and I think what they did was not easy at all, but like, it seemed easy, and a lot of bands wanted to try and do it. So it seems like maybe there was just a deluge of maybe bands that weren't so quality, so maybe it's harder to find, you know, the better bands. And I think, like, you know, we've all grown up a little bit. We've expanded our influences. We've expanded what we listen to and our musical abilities. And I think a lot of bands that even I toured with, you know, 8 to 10 years ago, are like, you watch them now and they're like, holy shit, like, this band is amazing now. Like, I thought they were good, but now they're excellent. So maybe, like, I think the ska scene has had some growing up to do, and maybe we're starting to, you know. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, like, Mike Park, you could talk about what that was like after the ska boom, like all the newer bands.
Well, first of all, just, there's a lot of topics you guys are touching, but the reason ska crashed so hard was because everybody who played horn in high school marching band started a band, and it was horrible. So you had a drummer who did not know how to play ska, was just playing rock beats, and they're just playing, it's just awful. I saw it, it was awful. The bands were awful. I mean, they were just wearing like dad suits with the skinny tie. It looked awful, it sounded awful, and that destroyed ska. But in terms of like the older bands like Less Than Jake, Real Big Fish, not taking out younger bands, it's hard. Like, so these guys are lifers now. This is what they do for a living. They have families, they have kids. It's hard to keep, like, for me, I mean, it was hard for me. Like I made a conscious effort like 15 years ago with the Asian Man. I realized, man, it's hard to sell records. And it was as I grew older, I just kept putting out bands that were my age. And I realized, man, I got to start going to Gilman Street again. I got to start going, talking to the kids and going to house shows. So that's what I did. And that's when I got that next wave of like AJJ, Bomb the Music Industry, Lemuria, Joyce Manor, etc., that I was able to like get out of that rut. But so if you just talk about the bands as you get older, it's just natural you don't go to the underground kids shows and you don't know what's going on. So like for Aaron Barrett or the guys in Less Than Jake, I know they're kind people, so there's no intention on their part of like discrediting the younger bands, but I would bet my life they have no idea who the new bands are. And that's not because they don't want to, it's just part of getting older. I mean, again, it's hard for me, and I make it a conscious effort to try to keep up with what's going on in every genre of music, and it's tough. And so for those bands who are doing it, who have been doing it full time for 20 years, I mean, that's their sole revenue of supporting their family. They have, there's so many external responsibilities of being 45 with a mortgage, 2 children, versus a 25-year-old who has not a care in the world. Like when I was 25 years old, it was awesome. I could just go to a show every night and just have fun, and that's all I wanted to do. It's so different now. So I think we need to cut a little slack for those older bands, and we really need the newer bands. They're the ones who need to step up. It's going to be the newer bands, because even if you play, like let's say a Kill Lincoln plays with Real Big Fish, it's obviously it's going to be good because there's going to be a lot of people there. But the people who go to Real Big Fish are older people who don't have. They're out to just have a good time and to reminisce about when they were younger. Versus even if Kill Lincoln went out with Just Friends or Mom Jeans, it would be way better for Kill Lincoln to tour with those bands than with Real Big Fish, because they're going to be playing for kids who are excited, who are going to be there when doors open and there's a line waiting to get in. And they're just excited to be at the show. And that's just part of getting older. And so we have to realize it's not the bands aren't taking out younger bands. It's just, they're just older. And so there's got to be this next wave. There's got to be a band that's, like, I've always said it for like the last 15 years. I'm waiting for the next specials for a band that's in high school, who have the style, the politics, and the songs. And just, if someone has if there's a group of kids who love each other, who love the specials and are good musicians, if anyone kind of replicates that sound, they're going to be the biggest thing in the world. Guaranteed. So if you're a high school kid watching and you're a good musician, just watch the specials and follow that formula. They're the best ska band that ever existed. I don't know if I answered anything. I was going on tangents and tangents.
No, you definitely did, and I'm so glad that is kind of the answers you gave, especially talking about the older part, because this is something that I have learned recently over the last year or so. I've been learning a lot of science and about just humans in general and how the body works. And when you're between that age of 13 and 18, basically puberty, your brain actually starts producing dopamine for the first time. Dopamine, obviously, the chemical that gets you addicted to things, that also makes you happy. Typically, people do drugs to try to synthesize dopamine production. But you also naturally produce it, and you produce the most of it in your body during your teenage years. So that's why they say whatever music you listen to when you're in high school, like, that's the music that sticks with you for the rest of your life. So, like, you have all these Real Big Fish fans, Less Than Jake fans. When you look at them, they're all like 40 now, because 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when those bands were popping off, they were all in high school. They were all in their early 20s. So, and they didn't have all the responsibilities. So it's more of they love those bands for that reason, and they'll always have that special a special place in their heart. And like Less Than Jake was the first band that I ever listened to as well. So like I have that place in my heart as well. So that's why I'm always like, I don't want it to seem like I hate this band, because I definitely, trust me, if I hated the band, I just wouldn't talk about them like at all. That's how I am with bands that I truly hate. But that's just kind of how the human mind works. You know, you like, it's that younger mindset that what gets you into bands. And when you look at bands that were popular, that quote unquote popped off, you start to see that their fan base is always in that like teenage to early 20s like range. Like when My Chemical Romance popped off, like all their fans are teenagers, and they stayed relevant because for some reason teenagers still listen to them. Like I have students that I teach in high school, and they're high schoolers, and they still listen to My Chemical Romance, even though that band's been broken up for like 10 years, and they still listen to like Paramore and like these bands that were always teenage music. People rank on it, but teenagers are the ones who are the most dedicated and most loyal fans. And like the younger folk, because they're not jaded yet, their brains are still developing, so they get attached to things so much. And so I'm glad you brought that up, Mike, because that is a very big point. And I think that's something too I've learned personally being in We're the Union, and I've kind of learned watching Bat Time grow, is newer ska bands, like, and I always say post third wave as 2002 forward. I feel like every ska band tried so hard to appeal to the generation of the 90s. They neglected the current generation. And that's kind of what happened. And I can't really name a single band that didn't try their hardest to get every Real Big Fish band or Real Big Fish fan to listen to their band. But it's like, why aren't you making music about what you're feeling and what relates to you? And that's why I think Jeff Rosenstock was successful with ASOB and Bomb the Music Industry, because Jeff's music, to me, it screams millennial. It screams every issue millennials have. And I feel like people who were young when Jeff was going, and even people who are like young now, can still relate to Jeff, because his music is very relatable and palatable to what the younger people are feeling. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on any of that I just said.
Yeah, I like Jeff Rosenstock.
I love Jeff. I was lucky enough to grow up in. I grew up in Jersey, so I saw ASOB a whole lot, and yeah, I mean, Jeff's a huge inspiration and just a totally different thing. And you're right, Jeremy, that like I think we did, and I learned this the hard way. I think like my band spent a lot of time just trying to get Less Than Jake fans to like us and Real Big Fish fans to like us, and we'd get those opportunities to play those shows, and it was great and it was a cool experience. But what really started to make our band something special, for me at least, was when we would have these shows at at the top floor of a Mexican restaurant, and it would be like all the kids who didn't want to go to the DC hardcore show, that didn't feel comfortable there, would come to our show. Not necessarily ska fans or people who liked Real Big Fish or whoever, but just people who liked high energy music and just wanted a place to kind of fit in. And we started to, along with some other great bands that weren't necessarily ska either, just try to carve out that scene. And I think that, our own scene, and that inspired a lot of why I wanted to start this label. And yeah, I want to focus on ska because I love ska, and I think there are some great newer, younger ska and ska punk bands, but it's just like to create this new sense of community as opposed to, waiting for someone else to take us on tour, waiting for someone else to give us an opportunity. It's like creating your own opportunities. I think the tour I was, we did this tour, Jeremy, was it last year, 2 years ago, with We Are the Union, Kill Lincoln, and Catbite?
Yeah, it was last year.
And it was like just us three bands, and, Watsu has a great following, but, we're three smaller bands, and like we did 4 days. It was a short tour, but every show was absolutely insane. It was just an amazing tour, and I think it was just proof that like, with just some hard work and like-minded folks, like you can build up your own scene. So, yeah, that's just where we're trying to go with it, I think. I don't know.
And I think you're doing a good job.
Thanks,
from an outsider's perspective. I'm really excited about what you're doing for the genre of ska punk, because again, like Jeremy had said, no one was doing it, and for you to take that dive, it's risky. It's very risky. Yeah. But it's cool. It's cool that you did it.
I really appreciate that, more than you probably realize. But yeah, it's risky, and I understand that's why labels didn't want to sign ska bands, and that's why bigger bands, and of course it's not less than Jake's fault that they're not playing with younger bands. I mean, they have a booking agent, and it's at some point it's a business, right? I mean,
It is a business.
They have to make a living, so it's understandable, and I get it. And from running a label with Ska Bands, I understand why a label that needs to make money wouldn't necessarily want to sign a bunch of Ska Bands. I get it, but I want to take the leap, and I think now it's a good time, and especially with people like you, Jeremy, who are, you really have like people's ear on the internet, and you're like preaching the good word of like what can be good about ska. You're really like helping to reach people and hype up our scene and what can be so good about it. So I want to thank you, Jeremy. I think it's like you've been doing.
Good job, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Thank you
Pat
so
each other on the
much.
backs. Jake, you're awesome too. Counterintuitive's the best.
Jake, what
Let's
was
all
your,
give ourselves a nice.
Jake, what was your perception on ska music prior to Ska 2 Network when the counterintuitive thing, or just in general?
It was pretty low. I'd say my introduction was like Tony Hawk Games, Goldfinger, Suicide Machines, Less Than Jake, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like 3 songs, and so the most that I listened to, like I got really into Losing Streak by Less Than Jake, but I was so out of the ska scene that I didn't even realize I was listening to ska. I thought they were just like a punk band, and so I'm just like, oh yeah, this is just like a cool punk band. And I feel like it probably wasn't till like I dug into Jeff Rosenstock on the music industry, Arrogant Sons of Bitches, that I was like, oh, so like ska music can be cool. Like cool people can be doing it. And I was probably in my 20s at that point. And so I definitely missed the wave of like ska being my genre. Like it seems like the main genre for you three. But I missed the wave on that, but I definitely had some peppered into my musical taste throughout my life.
That's so interesting. I love how you said like, oh, cool people can make ska too, which is like,
we all got a good laugh.
Yeah, I really like that.
It's true.
And I think it's really interesting that you kind of just didn't know. Like, I don't know, for me it's like obvious, it's been so obvious to me that ska is like this huge world, and I'm sure for Mike it's very obvious for them too. And that's why I kind of want to have you in this call, to get that like outside perspective of someone who didn't know too much about ska and what is that like? Because I feel like anyone who's a fan of a ska band, like there's no casual ska fan. You're either ride or die for this genre, or you don't care about the genre, or you hate it like a lot. There's like the 3 types of ska fans, and that's it.
I'm curious, Jake, like where did you grow up? Because I feel like I have a theory that getting into ska in the 90s and realizing that it was ska, I mean, maybe had a lot to do with like the regional pockets of ska, right? So I grew up in New Jersey, and I was lucky enough to have, with a band like Catch 22 that got very popular. There were lots of local ska bands, and there were lots of ska shows, and like you'd go to a show that was billed as a ska show, like, here, go see this band you like, and here are all these other ska bands. So where'd you grow up? Like, what was your local scene?
Okay,
like?
So I grew up in Massachusetts, so I feel like there were a decent amount of ska bands around here.
Then my theory's out the window. Then.
Yeah,
so
like Mighty Boss Tones. I'm pretty sure. I won't list any more because I probably will get them wrong. But yeah, I feel like there were some ska bands around here, and I just like was so loosely aware of it. I would hear like Suburban Rhythm in my friend's car when I was 17. Like, oh, this is pretty cool. But that was the extent of like me. I would never seek it out on my own at that age.
Word. Yeah.
Nice.
There was another thing that I did want to talk about that was kind of in the vein of what we were talking about, but I can't remember it. So I'm going to go on to the next thing I want to talk about. And that is the idea of the 4th wave of ska. And I kind of want to... So I have my personal feelings about the term, both of the term and the idea of the 4th wave, but I kind of wanted to, Mike Park, what are your ideas, if you haven't talked about them already, about the 4th wave of ska?
Yeah, I believe the 4th wave is happening right now. And so stylistically, what are we speaking of? I don't know, because even in the third wave, you had bands like Hepcat and the Slackers that played a more traditional sound. Then you had the Less Than Jakes and Real Big Fish, Voodoo Glow Skulls, um, Boss Tones who played a punk rock sound, and then you had bands like Isaac Green and the Scholars who played more of a two-tone sound. So I think it's just going to be more of that. There's going to be bands that are just going to start pushing the pedal of what they want it to sound like. Maybe they'll be doing grindcore and they'll break into a ska beat. You know, you had bands like Falling Sickness that were just playing ska as fast as humanly possible, which personally I didn't get. If there's just no groove, it's just like how fast can I play ska? And it's just like I don't know, but I'm not down with this. So we'll see. I think bands are just gonna play what they want, but the new bands, all the new bands now, this is the fourth wave. Like I feel like a band like Catbite is the fourth wave of ska, and they play more like of a soul style ska, at least to my ears.
Mike, do you have anything?
Yeah. I mean, I think if they're, it's people want to argue about this all the time and put a label on stuff. And if there is a fourth wave, like I think it's either here or it's been happening. It's hard. I know we've had this argument, probably Jeremy. Like, is the fourth wave about genre? Is it about a political message, a point in time? Is it about popularity or commercial success? Like, what does that mean, right? So how do you know it when it's happening? But there have been bands, I think like ska core. I know there were, there's tons of like in the 90s there were ska core bands. There was Blue Meanies doing like very interesting stuff. I think there are bands that are taking that to like even a new level, like a band like Folly from New Jersey with like metalcore and like weird mathy stuff, and then ska breakdowns. That was I've to this day like only heard one other band like Folly, and that's The Best of the Worst, who I always like to shout out because they're an incredible band. But like there's so that's a new genre thing happening with political message. Like a band like Catbite is a pretty very very political band, and I know with their new music coming out too, it's going to be there's a lot to say right now. So I think that's certainly happening, and I think the missing pieces are their commercially successful ska bands. I mean, there's the Interrupters, right? I wouldn't, they're are they part of the DIY ska underground scene? Like maybe not, but that's a ska punk band, and they're successful, and it's back on the radio, and it's back in people's minds. So I think you could definitely make an argument that the fourth wave of ska is happening right now. It's just, yeah.
I mean,
it's
just
fun
from
to argue about.
our ska sales have increased quite a bit in the last few years, digitally and physically. Our roster is quite diverse, but it's always fun when I pack a ska record. I'll probably throw in some extra ska with it. This is it. I definitely feel this is the fourth wave, and I'm excited to see what new bands do. And I think it's going to be the success of a band like the Interrupters is great. It's going to just inspire. And I like that they don't have horns, because hopefully it'll get more like 3-piece or 4-piece bands just trying to play ska. And their Interrupters don't just play ska, and neither did Madness or the English Beat. Like if a band that get labeled a ska band, that doesn't mean they just play ska. I mean, Less Than Jake plays a lot of songs that aren't ska. They play a lot of punk rock songs, but I mean, Madness's biggest hit was Our House. That was not a ska song. I mean, Mirror in the Bathroom is not a ska song. There's so many songs that these bands have done that aren't ska. I mean, and Madness wrote 2 full albums that weren't ska after Our House. They wrote Keep Moving and then Mad Not Mad, not a ska song on either album. And The Beat too, I mean, they were just like Save It for Later, not ska, huge hit. I Confess, not ska, huge hit. And but they still have their roots in ska. So we'll see. We'll see what this next wave has. I'm just excited that people are playing it. I think it's a great sound, and I just want kids to play music, any kind of music, whether it be ska or funk or metal. Just having an instrument, I think more, it's just dying. The idea of people picking up a guitar, piano, drums, anything. Just play something. Music is just an important ally in anyone's life. It's going to better your life if you play music.
Yes, agreed on all of that. Definitely, I have like this like I feel like it's a weird kind of contradictory, kind of two takes about the idea of the fourth wave going on. My first idea is there isn't a fourth wave. There isn't going to be a fourth wave. But I also think it's not because there aren't bands that are doing things, nor will there be bands that will be successful. But it's more of the idea that like the way that people in 2020 and going forward consume media is just so different from the 90s, and to me it's just not comparable. Like in the 90s, if you put Real Big Fish on the radio, and like the way you listen to music was the radio, MTV, or you went to a record store and you found records on your own. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but I don't think there were many other ways of finding music unless you had someone personally showing you the music.
Yeah, it was touring, MTV, commercial radio, college radio too.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's so accessible. Just that a friend can make a playlist and send it to you or share it. I mean, I think it's great. I think it's really leveled the playing field out where an unknown band can go viral
Mm-hmm.
and have a chance to compete with bigger labels. I mean, the bigger labels are scrambling. Like every major label is just like, what do we do? How do we keep this stupid plus job that is just wasting money? But yeah, I think it's awesome. And I tell bands, I don't even know why bands need a record label. Like I've tried to talk out so many bands with signing with us. I'm like, why? Why do you even want to put out a record with us? I'm not going to do anything. And it comes down to community. They want to be part of a community.
Yeah, yeah, and
Other than that, I have nothing to offer. Man.
Yeah, and I think that's like the super important part is like now we live in a day and age where everyone's media consumption is so personalized, and like it's like you have your own Spotify with all the artists that you like. If you want to go watch TV, you no longer have 80 channels. Now you have thousands of channels, but then you also have streaming platforms. So like, yeah, in the 90s, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones can be in Clueless, and then everyone sees Clueless because everyone sees the same movie. But now it's like the Interrupters are in like 3 different Netflix things, but you don't see everyone going, hey, did you watch this Hillary Clinton documentary and hear the Interrupters on it? Like, you don't see everyone going, hey, did you see the Umbrella Academy? And like, Ska fans say it, yeah, because Ska fans freak out over Ska and anything. But outside of Ska, I haven't met a single person who watches the Umbrella Academy and is talking about a Ska song in the show. And it's because just the way we consume media is so different from back then. So I think the quote-unquote idea of the fourth wave of Ska's going to be popular again, I think that doesn't matter because people just don't get into things like that. Fads don't happen the way they did 30 years ago. And I think that's a very important idea to get out of the head. Like, why should you support a band? Should you support a band because they're new and you like them? Should you support a band because they're big? And I think the Interrupters is kind of telling a little bit of how some people are kind of feeling about the latter half, because I remember seeing them in 2011 and no one cared about them. I thought they were pretty cool. I digged it, but like I could tell the room just wasn't vibing their music in 2011, 2012. And they were opening for Rancid. It was like 3,000 people were in that venue. And then that band grew. They put out, I think, 2 records before they put out their last one. And then they put out a 3rd record, and the minute they get radio play and onto Rolling Stones, and it's like their Spotify numbers spike up 500,000. And it's like, why did it take a radio hit for people to start caring about the Interrupters? Like, was it because the Interrupters is like a sign that ska is back and people feel that they need to listen to them? Or like, is it just, that's kind of where I'm at with that. But I definitely think
I think the Interrupters just wrote some really catchy songs, and they had a good network to back them with the Epitaph machine behind them that has the ability to make hits. Like I don't know how I've never sent a record to a radio station in my life, which is crazy, but I just don't care. I don't care. So, but with the Interrupters, yeah, I just think they wrote some good songs. They were in the and they had a record label that was able to support them. And again, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but the idea of it blowing up is not a good thing for ska. The best thing for ska is to stay underground. When ska was underground, let's say 1990, when Skank and Pickle put out their first album, Ska Funk Rasta Punk. I went. This is a true story. This is when record stores existed. I went to LA, drove to LA, and then just got a wagon, had a red wagon, and went to every record store to consign the record. And this is unheard of. They looked at the cover, and it was this very ska image, and they just straight out bought it. Dog, we'll buy it. We'll buy 10 copies. And I got rid of like 200 records just by going, this is an unknown band. And because it was so underground, that's what people did. If you were an underground ska fan, you went record shopping looking for ska. When Ska Boom came out with the Toasters album, Ska Boom, I just saw the cover and said, what the hell is this? And bought it. Mm-hmm. Based on the cover, based on the album title, and just looking at it and go, this is ska. I bought anything that was ska.
And I think that's true because I definitely go through Spotify, like related artists or like playlists, and I'll be like, hey, that record cover looks cool. And then I'll play it. And that's the image is definitely a thing that appeals. And I feel like regardless if you're in a record store or if you're out of a record store on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, I think that's definitely a very true sentiment. And I agree with it needing to stay underground. I think as long, like, for me personally, I'm not trying to sell a million copies with my original music. I kind of don't care. All I want is to be able to play ska music and be able to afford to exist, like be able to put time and effort into playing music. And I think any musician kind of can agree with this. Like, I just want to be able to make music and pay my bills doing so. And I think the people don't understand that the amount of support you don't need to be a millionaire like status. You don't need to sell out arenas to do that. You can do that and be a DIY band. And Jake, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, actually, about just like typically record labels will take money from artists or do unfair deals. And that's where you start seeing a lot of frustrations from musicians. And they think they need to sell out to a bigger label to reach a higher status to then afford to do what they do. But like, at the end of the day, you don't need to do all that. If you have an honest label who's part of a community and just helping you out, at the end of the day, you just want to be able to do your craft. And I feel like the frustration gets really bad with like bands in the Kill Lincoln size and the We Are the Union size and the size of these I call them the mid-tier bands, or the direct support on a big tour. You would call those bands the direct support. We're definitely beyond like the local band level. We're doing we're making the investment to create a good product, but we haven't pushed up into the level of support to financially support to financially support the product we're creating. So that's when you get bands like Chase Long Beach that everyone thought they were going to be the next big ska band, and then they kind of just broke up out of nowhere. And then you get like New Riot, broke up out of nowhere. And then you get like all of these ska bands that feel like they hit this plateau, and then they break up. And I think part of that is just that financially, at some point, you just got to call it quits. And obviously we don't want to do that.
Yeah, I think the funniest thing is, and probably anybody who's in a ska band now watching is thinking this, but like, I think for ska as a genre, yeah, for it to stay underground would be best. I think the people who want it to blow up are the people playing in ska bands who want to quit their jobs and who just want to play ska, right? They want it to get bigger. I think like a band like my band Kill Lincoln, our goal is to make enough money so that we can keep being in the band, like you're saying, Jeremy. Like, we sold a bunch of records with our new album, which we're very thankful for. And like, I mean, somebody might see that and be like, oh, wow, like Kill Lincoln, like, awesome. You guys are, what, are you going to like go on vacation with that? And it's like, no, like, because we did that, we get to like maybe make another record or maybe go on a tour to Japan or go somewhere like cool that we couldn't go before. There's a lot of expenses with being in a band, as a lot of people know. So yeah, it would be nice to get to a better level just for some of these bands, just to support the music making. It doesn't seem very possible to like support a living, for a lot of these bands. Like, that will take a lot. And I know a lot of, bigger bands that have a lot of trouble doing that, and like pretty successful bands. But yeah, I think bands just want to make enough money to like keep doing what they're doing and just support the music making at this point. Anything else is gravy, anything else is a bonus.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a struggle and that's like a struggle that I felt before Ska 2 Network kind of started becoming successful. I was right about to quit doing Ska 2 Network, and the only reason why it became successful is because my job cut my hours, and so I went from working 3 days a week. I was in college too, so I went to college 4 days a week, worked 3 days a week, and it went from 3 days a week to 1 day a week. So I was like, well, I got 2 extra days to make ska covers, I guess. And then the first cover I made blew up, and I gained like 50,000 subscribers off that cover. So it was definitely like, had that cover not blown up, like three more covers, I probably would have just been like, I'm done with this. Like, it is not worth the amount of time and effort just because I want to do it. I love making ska music, but I can't afford to exist. I need to, pay my rent. At that point, I had maxed out credit cards specifically on like all of my utilities and stuff because I couldn't afford rent, and that's just the reality. And I'm only one person, so I can't imagine being in a band with like 7-8 people and having to split those costs. Like, I think that's kind of another thing that people don't talk about with ska bands is like, it's not easy making ska music. Doing the ska beat, it's not easy. Like, if you don't understand how to drum on offbeats or drum to fit offbeats, it's not easy to do. It's not easy playing a horn instrument. People ask me all the time, what should I do to learn trumpet? And I'm like, you can show someone how to strum a guitar. You can show someone how to hit a drum. It took me 7 years of playing trombone to understand how air leaving my body works, even though I played the instrument. So, like, it's just harder to learn these instruments. They're more expensive. Ska is just more high maintenance than punk. Like, sorry, punks, but, like, it's true. So, and there's just a lot of nuance with, like, that I don't think people understand, too. It's like, that these bands need to make money, but it's like, a good trombone costs $4,000. Like, and even like a terrible trombone, like the bottom line trombones, they cost how much a regular guitar would cost, like $400-$500. So there's a lot of financial burdens that go into ska music as well.
Jeremy, I know you can get a P-bone for $150. Okay, just
that's still the price.
I know. I'm just kidding. That's
Those still the price of like an all right guitar, though.
Right.
The idea of putting together a tour with like 8 members in a van, 8 members that you got to pay, like that's so daunting to me. Like, when I work with a band like Origami Angels, a new band that I'm working with, and they got 2 members, and I'm like, okay, finally.
That sounds so nice, Jake.
Yeah, like
so
this
good.
is something where we can make this sustainable. There's 2 of you, like we can do this.
I have like this emo band called 1159, and we did a tour last summer, and there's only 3 of us. So I put all of our stuff in my Ford Focus, and I was like, we can tour in a Ford Focus. This is insane. Like, I had no idea that was possible. So yeah, it's the ideas. Sometimes I get a little mad at the DIY emo world because I'm like, y'all have no excuse to complain about how hard it is to logistically do these things. I've been in ska bands bigger than your entire touring package. Like, and we made it work.
Yeah, the Boss Tones, when the Boss Tones first came out west, it was just a 15-passenger van with a U-Haul trailer. And, remember the Boss Tones are all wearing really nice suits that are just going to be drenched every night. And they made it work. They just brought one merch guy and the 8 members. So 9 people in the van with the trailer, and they just did it. You just make it work. If you want to make it work, you'll make it work.
And that's something I'm very excited to see with upcoming bands. I kind of already expect these bands to do the thing of a new ska band becomes relevant for a few years and then they drop off. That's kind of what I've expected at this point. I remember when I first got into ska, there were a group of bands that looked like they were the next bands to come up, and I was like, oh, so excited. And then they all broke up, and then there was like a dead point, and then they did that Ska Revival tour like in 2014. Was Kill Lincoln part of that Ska Revival tour?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And I remember like The Last Slice was on that, and like there were a whole bunch of bands on that tour, and I was like, this is it. Like, this is it, the new era of ska. And then all those bands. I think Kill Lincoln's the only, y'all and Joystick are like the only 2 bands that are left doing something. And so then I was like, at this point, I'm like, all right, give it 2 years, and then all the bands are gonna break up. But with this new wave of bands that I've been pushing a lot on Ska 2 Network, like Grey Matter, pretty much all the Bad Time bands, really, like Grey Matter, Omnigon, Kill Lincoln, obviously, like all of y'all, it's like, to me, it seems like it just started. Like, y'all have been around for 2 years, so doing this Bad Time entity, and even bands outside of Bad Time. There's so many of them. Like it seems like everyone's just getting ready to do so much more, and that's something I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and honestly, like bands break up a lot, and for so many reasons, right? And especially with ska bands who have extra members, like you go through members like crazy, especially when you've got big horn sections, and when it starts to change enough, you just you just either don't want to do it anymore or you forget why you're doing it, and especially if it's not if it's interfering with your livelihood or your family and all that kind of stuff. So it's totally understandable that a lot of those bands aren't around anymore. But yeah, I'm really happy with you know with the bands that have been with Bad Time and that I've been finding, and I've known, and most of the bands that are on the label I've met personally from touring. Tim and Catbite in his old band, the Snails, they played my wedding, so I go back a long time with Tim, and yeah, it's just there's a lot of good people out there making good music, and we just want to build a community, and it's starting to happen, and people are starting to be interested, and it's really cool, and we just kind of want to keep making good stuff and adding nice people to our crew. That's the whole goal.
And
Yeah,
you're doing it. You're doing it. I feel very optimistic with what you've got going. Um, in terms of what my role is in this fourth wave, I don't know. I'm pretty old and tired at this point, and so I'm hoping. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about a Bad Time Records, where they can really take it and still tour and be a face. And, talk to the bands. Are like, oh, this guy, Mike from Bad Time, is a really nice guy, and just do it. It's really encouraging from my standpoint to see what you're doing in this genre.
Cool.
Very tough genre,
oh yeah.
ska punk.
Yeah, I think that's what, and I appreciate it big time, and I think like yeah, it seems like ska and ska punk just needed like a waypoint, just like something we can gather around, because there's so many good bands all across the country, and we're either we had this little network before Bad Time, like I the same couple bands would tour together. Like we would tour with Still Alive, and we would tour with The Best of the Worst, and we'd tour with, do some shows with We Are the Union, and we were all together, but it was nothing like kind of officially. So I don't think I'm doing anything like crazy. I'm not doing any, I don't have any like special secret to it, other than I was like, hey, we should have a spot where we meet up, and like a spot where we can come together. And Jake, like that's one of the things I really like look up to with your label. Like you guys have really created this strong community, and like you have this like people know when there's a counterintuitive band coming out, like you kind of know what to expect, but you not in terms of the music, but like like it's gonna be like good people with like interesting music. They're gonna work together, they're gonna tour together, it's gonna be like a solid like positive force, that's going to happen. So like yeah, that's something I think the ska punk world specifically really needed and was missing, and that's what I'm trying to put together. So
Yeah, that's definitely something that has been missing from this world. And like I've said it to you, Mike. I don't think I've told Jake this, but I've said it to you. Where Bad Time Records is right now reminds me of where Counterintuitive was like 3 years ago, and that gets me really excited, because hopefully y'all continue to grow. Both labels continue to grow in your respective ways, and then hopefully 20 or 25 years from now, both of y'all could be at the legendary status of Asian Man Records.
An ideal world for sure. Yeah, I think
yeah,
that
wow.
that totally makes a lot of sense though, because I always felt like when people would like give me credit for counterintuitive, I almost felt like I shouldn't be taking it, because it's more about the collective of all counterintuitive really was doing was being the thing that all these bands that were already like a community can rally around. And so it sounds like that's like exactly what you're doing with Bad Time, and I feel like that's like what's made it successful, was just that all these bands that were doing the thing now that didn't have a place to just be unified and all working together, it basically just gave them that place.
I think that's kind of like that's just the organic thing that typically happens, that makes music and any art kind of successful. Like, you know, the Scotalites weren't in Jamaica and Trojan Records. They weren't in Jamaica in the 60s. Like, all right, we're going to develop this new dance genre that's going to sweep the nation. It's going to have 3 waves. It's going to hit like they didn't have a plan. They just made music because they like making music. And then when it got to the UK in the 70s, like the whole two-tone thing, you know, they were just Jamaican immigrants and they liked their music and they played it. And then the English liked the music too and they just had shows. And then when it came to America in the 80s, they were just playing it because they liked it. Labels formed because they wanted to do the thing. Like, you know, no one, I don't think anyone back then before, and I'm sure Mike can attest to this, no one prior to 1992 or 3 making ska music in America ever had the idea of getting big off of it. They just did it because they loved it. And we talked about this a little bit earlier in the stream, but like, yeah, it's like I feel like with the explosion of ska in the 90s, it kind of created this idea of like, if it's not big, it's all for nothing type thing, where it's like, being big isn't the goal towards ska, and being big isn't a reason you should support a ska band. Being big isn't a reason you should really make any art, in my opinion. So, and I think what Bad Time it has been doing, what Counterintuitive has been doing, and what Asian Man had done, it's all very similar, where y'all just did it because you loved the music and wanted to create that space. And so that's why I'm very excited for the future of all these labels and ska in general.
And Ska Network.
Thank you. I'm glad people enjoy Ska Network. Yeah, thank you to everyone in the chat. I remember before the stream, I was like, we should engage with the chat, and then I totally forgot to do that. I've been keeping an eye on the chat though. And I mean, it looks pretty well. Everyone's kind of just agreeing with stuff and agreeing with what we're saying. So thank you to everyone who's watching. I pretty much talked about every point that I've wanted to talk about. And I don't know about y'all, but I definitely learned a lot from the perspectives of everyone in this chat, as well as people in the chat in general. So thank you everyone who's been watching. It's been at about 200 people watching the entire time. So
has anyone disagreed with anything?
Yeah, say in the chat if you disagree with anything that we have said, or if you just disagree with everything that we've said.
Nice.
Controversy is always exciting.
I will say this. Controversy is engagement, and engagement makes my analytics go up, so you can get as controversial as you want in the comments. Actually, funny story that has nothing to do with ska. The Bad Guy cover I did, that originally it did pretty well at the beginning, and then I guess it made its way to 4chan, where someone wanted to raid my channel. So within an hour on one day, I got 50 comments that were all like really negative. People saying the N-word, people just being like racist, whatever you can think of. It was the worst. I was asleep when it happened, so I didn't notice. But because they commented so much, it actually boosted the video to trend. And then I woke up to 400,000 more views on the video. And they were the reason it trended. So like, if you want to get controversial on my videos, go ahead. Sometimes I engage with them, because what they don't realize is the more they comment back to me, the more YouTube thinks that they're engaging. So my stuff just trends more. So sometimes I'll engage with them a little bit, like just responding, and then they'll keep commenting paragraphs and paragraphs, and I don't read them, and then I just say, I know you are, but what am I? And then they comment more paragraphs, and then my stuff trends more. This is the YouTube analytics secrets.
That's how you build a business right there.
Yeah.
Free ad revenue.
Jeremy, I wish we could talk. Maybe we do another live stream where, I mean, I think like what you're doing and just this model of how you make music and how you put it out and how, you know, you're using YouTube and the social platforms, like that to me really feels like something truly different, right? Like if we're talking about waves and different new things happening, like what you're doing is really, it's not a traditional label model. It's like this new content creation thing, and you're using, you know, you're playing ska and you're in that world. It's like very, very different. So if there's a fourth wave, I think maybe it's Ska Network. I don't know. Maybe that causes some chatter in the comments.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm glad people enjoy it, especially because when I first started it, and I think this is both kind of telling that of what people expect isn't exactly true, and also just telling about what people want in an artist, is when I started, it was very bad. Like, it was very bad. Like, I just had a $20 interface, and I think it was a microphone from Rock Band or like one of those video games or whatever. And I just recorded covers because I cracked Logic. It was pirated, and I just started recording stuff and I put it up and people enjoyed it. And I was like, I don't enjoy this, but y'all enjoy it. And I think at the end of the day, it's like everyone's different. And a lot of artists I've noticed are too like afraid of just putting their stuff out there because they're like they think people are going to ridicule them for it or tear them down for creating art that's not good. And I'm like, at the end of the day, art is art. If you like what you like, make it, you know, like that's all that matters. And that's kind of how I've treated it. And that's why I like to support bands that, and to me, it's obvious when a band is being genuine. Bands will like slide in my DMs, and sometimes I can tell they're just being genuine and nice. And sometimes I can tell they just want to like extort me for my clout type thing. And as long as you're being nice and genuine, I think everything will be golden. Your music will be successful. You will be successful. Success is not determined by follower count. It's not determined by how much money you make. It's determined by how happy you are with what you're doing. And that's kind of how I feel pretty happy. This last month has been kind of rough for me just because I worked really hard this summer and I was putting out 2 covers a week all summer and I burnt myself out. But overall, being a YouTuber, I'm still like I was flipping bacon at a diner 3 days a week, and I was not having fun doing that. So I'm very grateful for the support that I have gotten through Ska Network, and all I can hope for is use my platform to then push forward bands that I believe in. The same way a label, like any of y'all will sign a band that you believe in, can be great, and you want to help them reach that. That's kind of the same thing. And no, I'm gonna start a Ska Network record label. I guess that's the next step.
Yeah, do it.
Not a bad idea.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I know I've been texting all of y'all. I think I first texted Mike Park asking, and you're the first person I asked to be part of this video, and that was like in February, I think, or it might have been last year, honestly. Because I'm starting to get to the point where I've made plans for this channel and I've reached the 1 year of I still haven't done the plans. So yeah, it's probably been a while. But thank you for I'm finally glad this got together, and this is a thing that now will be on my channel for people to come back and watch if they want to and hear us ramble about ska music for an hour and a half.
Very cool. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, of course.
Likewise.
Yeah. Big time, likewise. Thanks so much for setting it up, Jeremy, and for having us. And it was really nice to talk to you, Mike, and Jake, too, about some ska and label stuff.
Sweet, yeah. Does anyone have any closing words they want to say? Maybe plug any of y'all's merch or label websites, social medias, anything like that?
Not really.
Maybe I'll just say be on the lookout for something new with Ska Network and Counterintuitive Records at some point.
Oh yeah, that's right. We were just talking about that today. I'm really excited about that. There's actually a lot of cool things that is going down with Ska Network. I'm doing a break right now. I don't know if anyone's noticed or not, but I have not uploaded a video. And aside from the 100 Gex cover, because that was kind of just sitting in my recording queue for like months, and then finally got vocals on it. But I haven't really worked on a cover. We were just talking about that today. I'm really excited about that. There's actually a lot of.
You need the break, Jeremy.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. My computer just glitched and the stream audio just unmuted itself. So I'm pretty sure the stream just heard like a weird delay thing for a second. My bad. It freaked me out because I was like, "Who's talking?" And I was like, "Oh, that's me talking." But yeah, I haven't done a cover in like 6 weeks, and I have a lot of cool things that's going to be dropping over the rest of the year, pretty much. So, as well as some cool stuff with Bad Time Records as well. So, I don't want to spoil any of that, but
big things coming soon. Just the vague big things coming soon, right? Let's all leave it at that.
Stoked to announce.
Yeah.
Nice.
Right. Well, I guess I'll just end this with saying thank you to everyone once again. And if you're not following Bad Time Records, Asian Man Records, and Counterintuitive Records, go ahead and follow that. I will leave links to that in the description of this video once it's done and uploaded as a YouTube video. And thank you all for being here and being a part of this. Ska! Pick it up!